soon?
You
All right.
are live and ready to go whenever you're ready.
All right, Dave, thanks for your offer, but I'll try to work with this. If
Okay.
I start to spin out, or start to say very ridiculous things or wobble around, let me know and you can take over.
Okay.
All right, call to order, and if we can have a roll call and confirmation of a quorum. I can do that. John Rafter here. Luke Murphy. Luke is here, or,
Luke is not here, it looks like.
okay,
He's
me-
not
let me
on the
rem-
call.
You're going to call him?
okay, well, just,
I'll give him a call while you guys conduct your business.
okay. Dave Risberger
I'm here.
and Katie Lapari Shu, those are the four members of the committee. Len Carson, note that Scott and Len are both joining in on the call. Anybody else? Gary is here, Doug Brenner is here, and David Mersig is here. So first order of business, the approval of minutes from August 10. How do they seem? Okay.
I'll be honest, John, I have not had a chance to look at them.
You know they were great. They're fine. Katie says they're fine.
I wasn't there.
Oh, but she liked the minutes.
Great. I'm sure. it was
All right,
great.
we can visit those again if we feel we need to. Do we have any public? There's certainly no
You do
one
not.
here. So,
There's no public comment or correspondence.
all right, great. So we have two topics. So I think we can go through them one at a time. And we have the mask ordinance. And this was discussed. Katie is, yeah. Katie has brought it up. Dave has brought it up. So why don't we start with that? Dave, you had done some work with that. We also
Yeah, and
got-
I'm just bringing it up here, and it looks like all my notes that I wrote on it are gone, but that's okay.
Okay,
I don't necessarily need them. So I looked at the mask ordinance that Cooperstown uses, and I mean, obviously, it's not a document that we can just cut and paste to the council.
David, could I jump in here for just a second?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, some legal thing that you need to say, Dave?
Yeah, I do. Did you see the emails that I sent out this afternoon
No, I have not.
to
Sorry.
everybody?
I have.
Okay, what I did was I cut the Cooperstown ordinance is a direct cut and paste from the Department of Health regulation that was passed pursuant to the executive order of the governor. So in essence, the mask ordinance that we're talking about is already in place. It's just we would simply be making a local application of it. It's already a regulation statewide under Department of Health regulations with the penalties as everything. And again, I in the email that I sent you, I gave you a link to the Department of Health, directly to the Department of Health regulations, so you could see it. So all they have done, in essence, is taken the New York State Department of Health reg, and made it into a local law.
But didn't they expand on it for because I read the Department of Health one also. I thought I sent it out. But did they expand on that to include certain areas of Cooperstown? Because it seemed
They
very
did.
specific.
Yeah, they did. Again, what they again the chief may be able to address this issue for me, but in my opinion, based on the statute as it is, the chief could write a violation of the health department regulation as it is to someone who wasn't wearing a mask or social distancing. What this would do is simply incorporate it into a local ordinance, which would mean we'd get the money from the fines and things. So again, I'm not saying that this doesn't make sense to do. I just want to give you a heads up that in fact, the mask ordinance, the mask regulation has already been in place, and it will continue to be in place until obviously I will always defer to the mayor.
Gary, go ahead.
Dave, my understanding is that the state order requires a mask only if you cannot ensure that you're going to be 6 feet apart from another person. While the
correct.
Cooperstown ordinance requires a mask under all circumstances.
That's what I read.
Yeah, there's an exception for if you're socially distanced in the Department of Health reg. That's true. So if what you're going to do
that would be the difference.
Yeah, you have to wear it geographically anytime you're in whatever area you determine, then that would be a heightened provision. Thank you.
So did I read it wrong? It seemed to me, and it's entirely possible, it seemed to me that the Cooperstown ordinance was saying that you had to wear the mask if you were downtown, regardless of social distancing. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's what the mayor was pointing out.
Yeah, and even in front of on your own property, I believe.
If you're in the downtown area.
Yeah.
I mean, so we would have the option to either include or not include that language, right? So, because my suggestion, and I would hope that it would be considered pretty seriously, is that the mask ordinance be, when we define the area where the mask ordinance is going to be effective, or may be effective, because we aren't, hopefully we'll pass it, that it would include densely populated residential areas. And so I don't think that it's necessary or would be popular to say that if you're out working on your front, like trimming your bushes, that you have to have a mask on. But, if there's a way to say, or like if we just didn't include that language, if you were on your own private property, we might be able to avoid that. Because I also read that. Which, when we're talking about rentals and people gathering outside of rentals, it might not be the worst idea, but I think we're going to hit some backlash with homeowners. So something to consider.
So go ahead, John.
The folklore around masks, or what many people seem to think, is that if you're not proximate to other people, you're walking on an empty street, or you're across the street from one another, a mask is not necessarily, you don't necessarily put it on. And that so far includes Main Street. I have seen people walking around with a mask in their hand, ready to throw it on or run across the street if they're about to come near anyone. But that's it. I almost think that that's what many people believe. Other people are wearing masks everywhere.
Right. And some people are not at all. And I think it's those people that this ordinance would be trying to address. So when I think about my neighborhood, there are obviously a lot of people who have their masks ready. They're out walking their dogs, whatever. But in the middle of the night, for example, when there are groups of 15 people walking by my house and none of them even has a mask on their person ready to put I think that those are the people for whom something a little bit more specific might be helpful.
Katie, when you say thinking about residential areas, are you thinking about areas that are coded residential, like R1, R2, R3, or do you have something a little bit more different in mind?
Well, I guess it depends on the limitations of what we can do. I think that those zones definitions are a good place to start. I know for me, I could pretty clearly define a bunch of, or a section of the city, a bunch of blocks where it would be really helpful in my area. We could do cross streets if that's the way, it looked like that was the way that Cooperstown had done it in their ordinance. So if we have to do it the way that you suggest, it would be a broader swath, I think, of the city. Or we could just kind of focus on the intent, which is to make sure that groups that are traveling through residential areas on their way to downtown or parties or wherever are masked up. So, and the other thing is, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, Luke, and I'm really glad that you're on the committee, because I know that you have a decent amount of rental properties in your ward, and I don't know, they're obviously not in the college to bar pipeline, but I don't know, I defer to you on what would be best for your neighborhoods. And I don't think you have like Grand Street and things, but you may want to talk about that area as well.
Yeah, I have gotten the big, from my understanding of the ward, is the big street where there's a lot of activity in terms of partying is Otsego Street. And I believe there's about approximately 10 residences that are rentals that are, I have actually received complaints about, and I've a couple of particular residences on Otsego Street. I think, it's been proven that masks do work, as seen in, from the college staff that have tested negative. I do worry a little bit about targeting. I think it's important. Obviously, we should do everything we can in our power to limit the spread. But I also worry about targeting certain populations. If there's something that can come back to bite the city, if it's targeted to areas that are strictly residential. And I also have concerns about, for example, I think, if we talked about a mask ordinance on Main Street, particularly the high density shopping areas where people tend to congregate. However, I do worry about the ability to enforce in the blowback that we could potentially get from trying to enforce in residential areas, people having their masks. And I wonder the effectiveness of it.
Okay.
David.
Okay, can I make a suggestion first? Because I don't want us to spin our wheels on this one. I think maybe if we're all in agreement that this should at least be discussed, maybe we need to focus where we're talking about the issues are, because everybody's right. There's some people wearing masks, but there's also a significant number that are not wearing masks that are walking in groups still. And I know the concerns heightened because of the last week or so with SUNY. So maybe we need to define, and I don't know that I would define it by zones, because that might be more difficult. Maybe we need to define it like Cooperstown did, are we talking about Main Street, or are we talking about the center city neighborhoods? And if so, I mean, when I'm thinking the region that we'd really want to focus, because we don't want to be telling people, I don't think we want to be telling people out on like West End Ave, hey, you need to wear a mask all the time. In the concentrated neighborhoods which would be like between West Street over to maybe Union Street, possibly include Grand Street. I mean, we could adjust whatever we want to do. But maybe if we define it by streets within that area, that would help us focus it. And then we decide, does it need to be that big, or are we talking only Main Street? And I'm thinking from what Katie was talking about, she was referring to, the second question would be, are we talking public property only or private property only? Because there is the issue of the students, if anybody throws another big party with 50, 60 students on the lawn, obviously, if they have no masks, do we want to give the police yet another tool in their toolbox to deal with that sort of gathering? So I don't know, maybe we need to discuss first, are we talking only Main Street, or are we talking the neighborhood?
I'm talking the neighborhood. I think it's really, I mean, for me, living where I do, I think it's really important that people have a very straightforward expectation that they should be wearing masks. Because, I mean, people walking here, you're likely to run into people when you go for a walk here. So even though it's
Concentrated neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. I think when we talk about the zones, R1, R2, like, I'm not even totally sure where those are. Do you know what I mean? So it's just a little bit more nebulous in terms of like our students. And
I think it would be much harder to define it that way.
Yeah, I mean, people just, I don't think they're going to know. But if you say, once you cross Elm Street, you have to have a mask on, like that's a little easier to understand, I think. So yeah, so my suggestion would be, just like I said, living where I do, I think it's important in the Center City neighborhoods to have the ordinance be effective.
Luke and John, what are your thoughts on it? Main Street or neighborhoods?
I
John, how are things up on the Hill?
I have seen very little in terms of people behaving in a threatening way that is maskless. I have students very near me on Linden Street, next door to me, another down the way. And if it is an individual mandate for someone who lives on my block, I'm not excited about that. I just think people who are 6, 12, or alone on the street, it's not a problem. And if people are making noise, walking down the street, I feel comfortable calling the number, and anyone would. I'm not sure now about the catching of people doing that, because there's an enforcement issue, and I wonder if and I'd ask Dave this later if he let other people talk, but ask Dave, what are your anticipations legally about differential enforcement of that regulation or that code?
Can I ask you to clarify what you mean by differential enforcement or individual mandate?
5 or 6 careless adults who happen to be walking, close to one another, and the police encounter them and they decide not to enforce it because they're old, and they just say break it up. And they could say break it up if they're not 6 feet apart and they're not wearing a mask. One differentiating factor is they're not students. They're not young.
Well, I'm
And
not
so
suggesting that we write legislation based on a specific age group. And I think that with any law, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Chief, but with any law, it seems like the police have the ability to use their judgment on whether or not they enforce it in the moment.
Yeah, I would agree. The first thing I think of are speeding tickets, and
Right.
the number of people I know that have gotten stopped and they got a warning versus me who gets stopped and gets a ticket. So
do you show them your card as the council person, or? note that you're a citizen.
I bet my
Oh, no.
eyelashes and it still doesn't work, John.
No, but I'm just saying, yes, I understand there is that kind of discretion. So I'd like to hear from David and anyone else about how to set up these things. What's a neighborhood it's a street that is, I mean, do each of us apply for our street? What do we do? David, I'm curious. What are
Do
the,
you mean me, David?
yeah,
The only, as I mentioned earlier when we were chatting about this a little bit, the only thing that I mean, the important thing is that there be a correlation between the place where the activity is anticipated and the
Mhm.
statute. As Dave was saying, we don't want to be saying the people on West End Avenue need to be wearing it because there's no inherent correlation. There doesn't seem to be a problem
Mhm.
there. So the statute that's created has to have some connection with a perceived problem. But
go ahead.
you could say if you're on Grand Street or if you're on Main Street from Elm Street to Chestnut Street
Mhm.
or on Water Street, any of those things. As I mentioned and as the mayor noted, right now there's a requirement to wear a mask unless you're socially distanced from all other people. So
Mhm.
to me, and that somewhat addresses Katie's situation with large groups that are together,
Mhm.
unless they're all 6 feet apart from each other. So what we're talking about here is saying you have to have a mask anytime you're in a particular location, 24/7. So the question is, how do you best define the place where it's needed, and define it so that people will have some expectation as to where they're going to be in trouble for doing it and where they're not. So the cleaner the definition, the easier it is for both the chief, for us to defend it, and for the chief to enforce it. So if you want to say again, on Main Street, on Grand Street, from Main Street to Fair Street, from whatever, whether you want to include the entire downtown area or not, going on to Market Street or not, to me, and you have to wear a mask within those areas, period, 24/7, no matter what time, no matter how many people are there, whether it's midnight or 1 a.m., you've got to wear a mask there. That would seem to me the most efficient way to address it, and the most easy to defend and easy to enforce.
I'm just pulling up a map right now of the city, and I'm going to see if I can. This is way beyond like the scope of my tech, but like I'm going to see if maybe I can screen share it with you guys so that we can talk about where we think would be appropriate.
Katie, if you don't mind. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Luke.
While you're doing that, I just kind of thinking about, I reviewed the ordinance for Cooperstown, and just kind of thinking about some of the differences and difficulties we might face. I lived in Cooperstown for a couple of years, and I've lived in Oneonta for several. And one of the big differences, obviously, is that Cooperstown is, this time of year about 10 times smaller in population, and they also have their congregation area typically on Main Street. And I think in a normal year, we typically would too. But one of the trends that, at least in my neighborhood ward, that we've been seeing is there's been more and more house parties, at least kind of maybe petering off a little bit now, but with the bars being so strictly regulated, folks might just think it's easier to congregate in their homes, which is great in some ways, that we don't have to necessarily worry about Main Street as much as we would, but also we have more of a speckled pattern of propping up of enforcement. Does that make sense?
Yes, to me.
It's a good
And actually,
observation.
I had a thought based on the Cooperstown ordinance. This may be a separate topic, so John, tell me if you want me to treat it as such. So in the mask ordinance for Cooperstown under subsection F, they reference Executive Order 202.45, which says that gatherings should be under 50 people or half the capacity of the indoor space, whichever is less. So that prompted me to it prompted me to think about what we were talking about at the council meeting with Chief Brenner about the number of people being dependent on each space. So kind of Luke, to your point with the house parties. And then I got looking at the rental agreements for several of the larger property management companies I'm starting to hate the word landlord, so I'm looking for other ways to say it, in Oneonta. And so I have them on my phone, but I looked at rental company one, at Prime, and at, of course, Peter Clark. And when I look at their rental agreements, they all have a subsection on parties. Wilbur and Clark, it's subsection 9 on a lease agreement, and then the other two at subsection 21. Let's see. Wilbur and Clark allows no more than 20 people in their properties for parties, and the other two are no more than 10. So when we think about enforcement under the executive order, should we be capping those at 50% capacity as well, which would be 10 and then 5 for the other two? And would that make enforcement of house parties easier, Chief Brenner? And again, John, if you want to treat this as a separate topic, we can totally do that, because it totally is.
I just want to make sure we don't get lost in the weeds on this, because I think we could very easily.
Yeah, it totally goes in a different direction, and I get that. But just something to think about, I guess.
I have a question, Chief. What happens now? Because I just about every day I see a group of 5, 6, and I'll admit most of the time it's students walking, no masks, and it's in the neighborhoods. What does OPD, what ability does OPD have at the moment? What is there anything to stop OPD from pulling over and writing 5 tickets?
Yeah, we don't write, the mask ordinance from the executive order has to do with public health law. We don't do public health law.
Okay.
Could you, if we were to write legislation and we're a city ordinance, would that then give you the, I don't know if authority is the right word, but
Yes.
purview?
Yes, because there's city ordinances for things that we enforce, things like open container and public fighting and all that. Those are all city ordinances.
Okay, great.
Just
That was
as
a
an
good question. Thanks.
sorry, Katie.
No, that was a great question. Go ahead.
Just as an aside, my thought with all this, if we decide to go this route, because I know this would be something that would be difficult to enforce 24/7. But just like writing, just like the seatbelt law, or speeding tickets, it's if you enforce it maybe 1 day or 2 days, or maybe a random day once every week or so, that's enough to send a message. It's kind of like, I know that whenever I'm driving with my wife and we're in a certain part of a different city that we used to live in, she'd say, be careful here. There's always usually an officer parked over there and looking for people that are speeding. So it's not necessarily true, but it's the message that gets out, and people start thinking about it a little bit more and paying better attention is my thought. So I wouldn't expect the police to have to do this 24/7 because they can't. But maybe at the discretion, obviously at the discretion of the chief, maybe they pick a day where that's what they work on, or a few hours on a Friday or something. I don't know. That's something to discuss later. But that's just my thought about this if we decide to go this route, because it is something it's going to be hard to enforce all the time. But I think it's important that with a high concentration of people that we have in the downtown area and looking at what's happened over the last couple of weeks, I think we need to get the message out that we're serious here and we don't want community spread.
Yes.
That's all I got.
David, Burzik?
If I could make a small suggestion, in order to tie into what David's concern was about getting caught in the weeds, I think, and again, Katie, you can correct me, but I think very often when you see the students traversing through the community, they're aiming ultimately to get downtown if they're doing the pipeline.
Not necessarily. Like Luke said, we're seeing, I mean, I think we're seeing more house parties this year than ever.
I was wondering whether if there's universal agreement that downtown is a place where you want it, that maybe we could start there or agree that that's something that's going to happen or not, and decide, and then branch out from there. Is there a consensus that you want people downtown to wear masks?
Yeah. From
Downtown,
me.
absolutely.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Then why don't you spend a couple of minutes on deciding what the parameters are for downtown?
Okay.
I mean, where downtown you think that we should do it, and then we can start there, and then you can decide whether you want to do add-ons or not.
Why not just use the MU1 zone?
You can do that, sure. If the council's familiar with the MU1.
I mean, it just gives an existing already parameter we've already established is the downtown zone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you, Stephen, but we want to write something that's easily defined for people that live here that are not on council or work for the city. So they need to be able to understand it. Maybe.
I mean, we could literally attach a picture of it.
Well, that would make it easy.
I mean, could we also
Pictures
just
are good.
say,
What's that, Katie?
could we also just say, Main and Market or Main from Market to wherever. I mean, we could also just define, we could also just define, like using the picture, we could define what the streets are so that we have it verbally also, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry.
Hey, John, the chief had his hand up.
Yes,
Yeah.
Chief.
I just want to say, I believe in the ordinance now, there's a ordinance against riding bicycles on the sidewalk, and that has
Yes.
definitions by street. I think it's Main parallel up to Spruce, and then the other way. It's just, if you want to look at a definition that's written that way, that would be one of them.
Cool. Thanks, Chief.
Little
So-
did most of you know that it's illegal to ride bicycles on sidewalks in the city.
I knew it.
It's also illegal to do exercise in the park on Sundays.
Really?
Yeah, there's a whole feats of strength thing. I can send it to you. It's pretty funny.
Scott.
Talk about that like next time? Okay, that'd be great.
Can we
Okay.
have something that has a baptismal certificate? You have to carry your baptismal certificate? Never mind.
Okay,
But
so-
I'm fine with what Dave is proposing. I'm not, we can make signs. People say, I didn't see the sign, and you have the police saying, well, that sign's there, so I get to give you a ticket. But yeah, I like the idea of pursuing this. I think that David's initial suggestion in taking what you're not allowed to do, is there a difference between, I mean, it sounds like house parties, et cetera, fall under something we're already familiar with maybe another definition, but
Okay, so I'm
so
gonna
where
have
do,
Carrie throw up the city map for everyone to just look at. So since we're all in agreement about the MU1 zone, maybe we can just take a look at.
that's just a city map. It doesn't have the word definitions.
Oh, do you want the word definition? I feel like
Well,
words
we've been
are-
talking about wards, so we can try
John,
to figure out the streets.
It might be easier, John, doing the streets just to zoom in. I don't know that having the ward map would really help us.
I
Okay.
agree. I would just zoom
Okay.
in and up if you would, Carrie. I'm pointing like you can see what I'm doing. Up to, yeah, that's pretty good.
I'm able to change my, Carrie doesn't have to do it. You can do it.
There you go.
It makes me seasick.
Okay, so if we go, so I'd like to look at like the center city neighborhoods too, if that's possible. So sort of north of, yeah. Yeah, now we're talking. So for me, I mean, I would recommend basically everything from, I think Dave said, you know, Union to West Street. And then I would go probably as, I would do that whole area, I think, up to the border of the school's property.
From Union to West Street?
Yeah. And I was going to say Cedar, but Dave lives north of that, so Normal.
I don't think we need to worry about Normal Ave since there's nobody on the campus,
Okay.
if that helps with the definition
Okay.
of what we're talking about.
So let's see.
One thought I have is if there isn't a legal definition, why are we picking particular street boundaries? I mean,
What do you mean?
I'm just worried about an overreach. Because I think what you were saying, I'd be compelled to wear a mask on my street.
Correct. In the center city neighborhood for your own
That's,
protection.
am I in the center city? I'm not sure what the bottom, but I don't.
Hey,
I'm
hey,
losing
Carrie,
my-
I
I'm
sent
losing
you
it.
an
I'm sorry.
email. Can you take a look at the email I just sent you?
Are we trying to make a decision of whether we're going to do only Main Street or we are expanding it from Main Street? Is that the thought process
Well,
here?
So I just sent Carrie an email that's got kind of the downtown zone that we recognize as the downtown zone
Yeah,
overlaid onto this map so you can see it.
Okay.
sure.
It should be, I don't know if she can, I should have sent. I think it's sent.
It's sent. I'm working on getting it in a better way to display it.
Oh,
Doesn't open
Sorry.
nicely.
Sorry.
That's
It's
okay.
a GIS map, so it's kind of hard to like, I just kind of screenshotted it for you.
Get it. Okay. Let's try this.
I mean, it would at least give everyone kind of an idea of like what we consider downtown as far as the. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Those are the parcels that we consider
Mhm.
downtown. I
Mhm.
put that in hash, in parentheses or quotations. So that's what we consider downtown in the
Mhm.
code office.
So I guess, I mean, that's even a decent swath east to west if we were just to extend it north. I keep wanting to scroll like it's my screen. At
Sorry.
least.
Self-interest is fine. Not necessarily the agreement from everybody, but can
I'm
understand
sorry.
it.
What
Never
was
mind. I would like to refrain from a recorded conversation saying I want it to be my street.
that? Okay. I mean, I just know that I'm hearing a lot of concerns from people in my neighborhood about, general respect for
I understand.
the situation. So, and since we split Central Avenue, that's challenging. But I mean, for me, I would suggest, and I would hope to gain support, considering it would mostly impact my neighborhood, if it went north, at least to Linden.
I mean,
So-
it's easy to make a map like this. I mean, it would be easy to make a graphical representation just like this. Like I could probably whip one up in like 20 minutes or less to add whatever parcels we wanted. But that just kind of gives you an idea of like what we call downtown in Oneonta.
Katie, just for my clarification, so if we were to kind of draw an imaginary line from Chestnut up to Linden and kind of over, and I know the streets are kind of not exactly lined up, but just kind of roughly from this, so kind of like Maple, Linden, Chestnut, that square, is that what you're thinking?
So Chestnut is
Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute. Church, I'm sorry, Chestnut's way over on their side. Sorry,
Oh, okay.
Church
Yeah.
Street.
No, I just was trying to follow. Okay, yeah. So, so basically, even if you took like where it's purple right now, and then
Yes,
just extended that farther north to Linden, which is way at the top of
Yep.
where you'll see Spruce and then Linden, even if it was just sort of that 3-block radius there, that seems like, that seems like at a minimum, I think what would be important to my neighborhood. And that is, well, I shouldn't say that. Most of that is my neighborhood, my ward. There's a little bit of Dave's neighborhood as well.
Chief, you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you tell us just quickly summarize what was the party scene this last weekend?
This last weekend, we only had a couple. Address areas would be Center Street by the lowest end, way down there by almost to the Clinton West Street.
Right.
We had a few others. Oh, geez. I think we had a few others. The other end is Center Street. I think we had some around Walnut Ford. Well, not Walnut. Cherry Street. Columbia, I think, was another one. Academy Street. And Otsego Street is generally where they were.
So there were parties. Like, what was the outcome?
We wrote one ticket or two tickets at the one on Center Street. The others were mostly just 2 or 3 people sitting on their porch having a conversation, and they lived there. So we didn't do that.
Oh, so I wouldn't consider those parties then.
Well, they were calls for parties, but they weren't anything we had to take any action on at all.
I guess what I'm looking for is now that the students they were supposed to have moved out of the dorms, that should decrease. You would think it would decrease some of the foot traffic heading from north to south. So what I'm looking for is what was the foot traffic pattern that first weekend, and was it as heavy as it typically is, where there's these crowds of people just going north to south and just looking for the local parties. And I think if that's not as much of an issue now, and I don't have the answer to this, but if it's not as much of an issue because the dorms are closed, do we want to start this on Main Street first before we look to move into the center city? I just don't know. I don't want us to debate and not be able to come up with anything when we could at least get this started. And I don't mean to trivialize the discussion, so I apologize about that. But I want to make sure we get something squared away with this. And if we can get one, we all seem to be in agreement about Main Street. Do we want to start with a focus there and then see what's happening in the next week or so throughout the rest of the city?
That could be, the very first weekend, there was a lot of foot traffic, but it has died right off. The other thing we've noticed is that our calls in general for these type of things seem to be stopping around 10 o'clock at night, where they used to always kind of start at 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
Now they're stopping sooner. But those other streets I mentioned is about where they are, and that's just, student housing, and a lot of people are very sensitive to any noise at all, just because they're scared, basically.
So I just sent Carrie a ward map too, if you guys want to see the ward map laid out. I mean, it gives you kind of a pretty good idea where everyone's ward is.
While that's happening, this is something that will be debated and voted on. And with Len, who's here? Who's not on the committee? Oh, never mind. Screen sharing is up.
So this kind of shows the downtown with the residential neighborhoods laid out by ward. So like you can see like the downtown, the pink here goes all the way up. So you could almost do maybe if you did it by ward, but then you would lose out. I mean, if you want to go all the way up to Linden, you're kind of splitting a lot. It's hitting a couple different wards in here.
I think splitting it by ward is going to be very difficult for people to follow, in my opinion. Yeah. Students understand Main Street, or they're going to understand the whole city. They're not going to understand wards.
I mean, I guess what I'm looking for is, I'm sorry, Carrie, would you throw that back up real quick? Thanks. So you guys will notice that the fourth ward is purple, and that is the bulk of the additional acreage that I'm requesting. I think I'm looking for, I mean, really ideally, Dave, like one block east, right, would be over to Maple Street, which I think would be prudent. If you were amenable to that. So it's just, I feel like this discussion of maybe we should just keep it to Main Street is folks, talking about what should happen in mainly my ward, and I'm trying to tell you that this is something that is important to the people who live in that ward. So that's just for what it's worth.
I got one more thing I'm sending to Carrie. Sorry.
Thanks. Info was good. The other thing is we could easily roll it back. I think it would be easier to decide on a bigger swath and then roll it back to downtown than to have this conversation again if things get worse. Or they
so
don't
this
get
map
better.
kind of shows you those residential neighborhoods you're talking about. And all these colored things are either 2-family, 3-family, or apartment buildings. So single family rentals aren't on this map, but like multifamily rentals are. Okay. So this gives you an idea of like where you've got some of these concentrated multifamily units. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is kind of indicative of where you've got your biggest population blobs. So like purple are apartment buildings, so they're more than 3-family. Pink are 2 families, and orange are 3 families. So anywhere you see like these purple buildings and these orange buildings, you've got between 12 to 15 or 20 people living there.
Okay.
So that kind of breaks down like in these neighborhoods where you've got the most people living. Because anything that's gray is a single family. So it's a 1 to 3 unrelated, or just like a me and you and Dave, family, or up to 3 people. So just something to think about.
So my impression is that there was some support for this at the beginning of the meeting, and that has cooled off. And I'm just wondering what everyone is thinking. Why? I mean, everyone
can
is
we-
excited about downtown, which is good, and that's a start.
Could we get back to the people pictures? Okay. I was thinking that although Scott and Len are members of the committee, they represent, their own perspectives. What are your thoughts, and what would you support?
I guess I'll go first.
Sure.
I'm leery of overreach.
Mhm.
As I've listened to this conversation, hearing around, if you use Stephen's first example of MU1, and then if it seems like this committee is steered on, it's the college kids that are an issue. Maybe I'm taking that out of the wrong context. Why aren't you looking at the university zoning then? It's right there on the map.
The university zoning, the students aren't there at SUNY. And they're at Hartwick, but they're kind of on lockdown.
We're trying to prevent community spread, Len. That's why.
Right. So if you go after those zones, the university zone, that's where, I don't have the numbers memorized, but I thought the number for SUNY campus was like 3,300, which I guess they're leaving, which leaves, if we have 5,000, there's 1,500 spread throughout the city. And then you have 1,500, I guess, staying up on Hartwick. So.
Wait, I don't understand what you're saying, Len, because if we are you saying to just target the university zone?
Well, Stephen was suggesting MU1, which falls in line with your Main Street issue.
Right.
Where you're saying there's a density issue. I guess people are not, according to you guys, are not obeying the New York State Health Department ordinance or compliance, whatever it's called. I don't know. I just reviewed it. Said if you can't maintain 6 foot, you're supposed to have a mask on.
Right.
Public
Yep.
space. And we're all in phase 1. All of New York State is in phase 1. So you potentially could have gatherings of up to 50. I find it interesting that we're checking up on parties of 3 people hanging out on their front porch. And that comes from the anonymity of calling in, I don't know if that's the right word, calling in without identifying yourself. So that's neighbor turning on neighbor, saying, hey, there's a party. And then the police department is running over to whatever street it is and finding 3 people hanging out, enjoying the night air. So I guess I'm concerned about
Scott,
over.
can we hear from Scott, Katie?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to make a quick statement. About what Len-
Rather than go back and forth between people to a binary debate, let's hear from people.
Sure.
Scott?
Well, I guess, I mean, I want to echo a little bit about worrying about overreach. And my problem with trying to do a ward thing is part of the 6th ward goes down Market Street. We have college houses down there, the apartments. So if we loop 6th ward into it, that part we don't necessarily need from River Street down through, because it wouldn't affect the population down here. So I don't think a ward type system would be beneficial. I think if we could take some police reports and look at exactly where the trouble areas are that might be a good approach to trying to define what we need. Or if we just want to look at high density, which would be, Main Street for the most part. I mean, I feel for Katie because I understand where she's coming from. Her needs are different than my needs, and different than probably Len's and Luke's, and it's just I'm just looking at, I don't think an all-inclusive law would work, because I think if you can walk, even the people are saying, Fauci and everybody, or however you pronounce his name, from the federal government says if you can walk and social distance, you don't need a mask because you need that fresh air too. So I think, and we do have people with health problems that they're going out later at night. I'm watching a lot and seeing people out later at night walking because they know they can have that social distancing and not have to have that mask on walking up and down the street. And I've also watched people who are walking and don't have a mask on, that when they're coming up to somebody, both parties put mask on, or one will cross the street onto the other side of the sidewalk to maintain that social distancing. So, again, my opinion would be, I don't think a ward-based one would work. And I think if we could just get some information from the police department on where the trouble areas are, and maybe that's where we might want to target. That might be the easiest way of doing it.
David.
Thank you.
Well, the police aren't really recording where people are wearing masks and not wearing masks. So I don't believe seeing police reports are really going to help in this situation. And I think that the high density areas are definitely downtown, the downtown neighborhoods. We're not talking like the 6th Ward. I think the map that Steve just showed us shows us where the concentration of people living are. And the big reports are not, it's not, for the most part, it's not the 12-month local residents that are walking in groups without social distancing. For the most part, people are walking, maintaining social distance when they don't have a mask. But what I think Katie and I are talking about is in our wards, we saw an awful lot of groups walking. There were still, I think there's fewer groups now, but we're still seeing groups of people walking together that, and I saw them over the weekend, that did not have masks, were not social distancing. They obviously don't all live together. Because unless they're like 15 to 20 young men and young women that are all in one house together. And as far as overreach, Len, I understand your concern, but I would disagree, because the same argument has been used for the seatbelt laws and other public safety laws. So this is an issue. I think as long as there is the edict from Albany about masks, I would guess that this would not be considered overreach. It would just be reinforcing the public health law that's in existence, and just give us a little bit more teeth to enforce it. My big thing is, do we want to start small, or do we want to go bigger and with the center city neighborhoods? And if that's what we want to do, and then have a bigger discussion with the council, let's do it. But let's at least define it.
I can just make myself known. I agree with Dave. I think that starting with the commercial center, et cetera, rather than try to, I think that would be a place to start. I also think that the idea of data on this, I think we're in a good spot right now. And although we want to protect people, I don't know what argues against, because my other thought was, let's make it all of Oneonta. I don't know what argues against that. To try to pick which streets people are going to be walking down. And then also, I have had no complaints. Not that it's a big deal, but I see people crossing the street, watching each other.
Do you see students doing that, John?
What? Say again.
I see people crossing the streets all the time to avoid, but what I don't see
To avoid, yeah.
huge groups of students splitting up to avoid themselves.
I have not seen many. Maybe it's not getting up early enough, but I don't see that. But this is a question of what are we trying to do? The broad statement is prevent something from happening, putting the entire city under that sounds like overreach to me. Katie,
Yeah, I think John,
what do we need to know from you that's different?
yeah, you raise a good question, right? Which is what is the difference? And the difference is density. We've shown that on a map. Stephen just proved that to us by looking at a map. And then I think there's merit to Scott's idea of looking at where the majority of the calls are coming from for the police department. It's not about mask wearing. I think it's about parties, right? Like if we can figure out, sort of triangulate where the areas where people tend to congregate, and then we have some data to back up why we chose the streets that we chose.
We could map that too.
Okay, sweet.
I mean, if we had, if Doug sent me every address we had this month that had a party complaint, I could make that into a map in probably 20 minutes.
So that's
And then
great.
what would we be doing? So these are parties that have brought the police into the equation, right?
Right. People tend to.
I'm
like
just
walk
asking broadly
around
to who was the zoning guy who was just speaking?
Talking about Stephen?
Yeah, Stephen just said he could map this data,
Mhm.
properties
Yeah,
that
you
seem
can-
to be out of compliance. I don't know if you
Yeah,
have
you can do
data
that.
or if anyone would have much data about what streets people are walking down.
No, but you have a general area, right? Based on where those locations are.
Well, where do you want to go? We have about 20 minutes left. Scott,
I just got a quick question, and I don't know if Gary can answer this or Doug isn't the governor's executive order for masks isn't it if you cannot maintain your social distancing of 6 feet?
It is.
Okay, I just
That's-
don't want to
that's
lose
correct.
track of.
That's correct, Scott.
God, I think the issue we're talking about is that's absolutely correct. But what Katie and I are saying is there's groups within our wards walking all the time that don't do either. And there's OPD has no ability to ticket them for it.
Right. If we
Well-
put out local ordinance, OPD has I don't know, I'm gonna use the word
if the
authority.
local, if the local ordinance gave the police the authority to ticket everybody in a group of 6 who has been lassoed, but walking too close together without a mask, would that be a way to address? Because one of the problems I anticipate is that there'll be 6 people walking along, the police are not there, and they walk on. This is an old problem, I think. You can't get the mobile. It's hard to get the mobile. But what if that was just wrong, illegal rather? It gives the police, you could call them, and the police could get there and ticket every one of the people. And oh no, that's right. That's the SUNY can't do anything about that to them. Is that correct?
I think the other thing that we need to realize is that this is a COVID specific ordinance. It's not something that we're saying in perpetuity in the city of Oneonta in these areas.
I
John,
agree with
you
that.
have said before, and I love it. The council can give it, the council can take it away. So when this becomes, because it will no longer be a problem anymore someday, we can absolutely roll it back, take it away. Len, just to address your point about college students, yeah, absolutely, 100% we're talking about college students, because right now there are like 600 cases among college students, and very few among the community, and we're just trying to keep it that way. That doesn't mean that we are prejudiced against college students. Those are the numbers.
That,
And the real challenge is that a lot of those college students, and even more now that the dorms are being shut down, are moving into the residential neighborhoods, such as my own. So that's why we're focused on those residential zones, because we want to make sure that our new neighbors are following the safety guidelines that keep their new neighbors safe. And we want to be sure that the police department has, to use Dave's word, this tool in their toolbox to be able to make sure that my elderly neighbors don't get coronavirus from people who don't think that we take this seriously. So that's where I'm coming from.
And if I might just say
Okay.
something,
Luke,
yeah,
you're very quiet.
I've been trying to
volume up.
I did. Oh, that's quiet. Is that better?
Sure.
Yeah.
Another thing that, yes, absolutely, Katie, as Katie said, this mandate will likely only go, and I would only support it so long as it goes to the statewide state of emergency with COVID. Once that stops, this law theoretically, or ordinance, however we're going to pass it, would not work. However, the governor has charged us to ensure the safety of our community, and that includes going above and beyond necessarily what has been said to the letter in the emergency COVID law. So I think it is warranted. I think it's okay for us to go above and beyond that.
Then I'm just shooting and I'm shutting up. I might go for downtown or the whole city, because what's good for a few is good for all. Rather than pick it out by ward or trying to figure out, even using students or where certain kinds of people live, I don't see why Scott's ward should be exempt from this. I'm saying that in levity, but laws are generally universal, not by blocks or not by particular zones, except for something that's clearly a commercial zone. We've divided.
So just to clarify on that, John, the map that I showed doesn't show college rentals. It just shows rental properties.
No, I care.
It's a
care about
density
a
map.
Right,
So,
and
Right.
everyone
So you just I'm not trying to take a side here. You just said targets college kids, but those maps just show rental units. They don't specifically
I
say.
think clearly we're trying to there's an issue of targeting people like college kids, because they are people we have said these are the people who do this. And if
not the only one.
oh no, I think I never hear about the Red Hat Society doing it, but I would support, I just want to say it because we only have a little bit of time, I would support the downtown area or this whole city, but I can't ferret out what all this stuff is. These detailing things based on what. So it's either all the city or I can go along with the MU.
John,
Okay.
I think having it for the entire city misses the point. We're talking about density. We're also talking about just coming out of a week where we had almost 700 students test positive. I think we've seen the different, and many of which have moved into my ward over the last weekend. I've seen it fill.
I've had plenty of that too.
So, but I think we've seen the difference between coming down hard and firm with following the laws and being kind of lax with the laws, what can happen. You look at what SUNY's reaction was, you look at what Hartwick's reaction was. I think the people in the Center City neighborhood, in my neighborhood, in Katie's neighborhood, are very, very concerned right now because of the numbers of students that have moved in from on campus and the higher concentration of people moving about in this neighborhood. I don't think it makes any sense I don't think it makes any sense to have this law for the entire city. And I honestly, as I'm sitting here listening, I don't think Main Street is enough either, because Main Street kind of misses the point. What's happening now, I think the bars have done a very good job in limiting the number of people in their establishments. And that's also, we've seen that it's pushed students out and then into the neighborhoods to have neighborhood parties.
Exactly.
I know not everybody's going to be happy with my decision, but I would support having a mask ordinance, which absolutely can be defined by street. And we can define it from looking at the map. It almost makes more sense. Maybe even Clinton Street, moving east to Union Street, and then starting on Cedar Street and going down to Main Street and doing that. But I think starting just at Main Street, or not doing Main Street, or doing nothing, is going the same route that SUNY went. And I think that's dangerous, considering people are moving indoors, and we don't know what's coming this fall.
Hey, Katie, where do you stand?
Well, I just wanted to follow up on a point you made, John, about sort of.
Well, we only have a little bit of time, so I'd suggest.
I'm going to be very quick. I would
Okay,
have been done. I think David Merzig can maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but even though we are trying to solve a problem that particularly affects one segment of the population, because we're talking about location and not people, everyone who was in those locations would have to follow the same law, which would be equal protection under the law. Is that correct, David Merzig? Okay,
Mhm.
So we're not targeting students. We're saying we're seeing this problem. We're seeing it happen mostly here. So when you come into this neighborhood, these are the rules. So I, of course, support it. I've been here defending it.
now
For an
about,
hour and a half.
yeah, and are we talking, I'm confused. Are we talking about groups of people or a single person? So I'm going to if I get a ticket when I cross my street alone, do I get a ticket?
I think it would have to be individuals, correct? I mean, everyone would have to have a mask on, just like
So it's
the
legal
mask
for me to be
ordinance right now.
maskless on my side of the street and not legal
On
on your
your
side of the
property.
street? No, I don't have a side,
Property.
you're right. I'll be on somebody's, we don't have sidewalks. We're smart. But your side of the street begins I don't know, never mind. But if I cross a street where it's
I know what
legal,
you're
it's
saying.
illegal by a street.
If you're on Central and Central is included in the ordinance, then yes, you would have to have a mask on once you left your property.
And I think that's where it helps not looking at wards so much and doing it more as a population or as a density-based model, because you don't have to worry about the north side of Center Street versus the south side of Center Street. It's focusing on where the density is.
Okay.
Hey, John. I just asked Dave Merzig a real quick question. And instead of like trying to break it into streets or whatever, is could we do an ordinance that just says if you do not social distance or not maintaining your social distance and you're not wearing your mask type ordinance, then you could be ticketed for that. And Dave said we could do something like that. Would that be easier and
Sure.
give, that way it's kind of, you're not blocking and trying to block, and it still gives people the freedom to walk down the street without their mask on.
Yeah,
But
I'm
if they
fine
come
with
up on
that.
somebody, they can put it back on. And I mean, just
Need
a
to wear a mask
suggestion out there. That's all.
on
I'm
your-
sorry.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Absolutely. So if there is indeed an offense that is consistent with state law, we're not trying to extend it any further. That's fine with me. I'd vote for that.
And is that citywide?
Yeah,
I mean, I think that
but I think that's what Scott was saying.
I mean, I think the challenge with that is that then there's a much broader area where we're putting that on the plate of the police department.
It just gives the police an option should they see something. They're not going out, making this their top priority and hiring more people to make sure that everyone has a mask or is 6 feet away from people.
Of
It's
course.
they don't catch every speeder, they don't catch every drunkard, they don't catch, but it gives a consistent law that would allow people to say, I've got a neighbor who's coming out and they're doing different things. Simple.
I mean, we do already have ordinances based on pedestrian density, so we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is
What is,
unheard
remind me about what the density law is.
of.
Not
So
the
there's
density
the
law,
ordinances
that-
that are based on density, the bikes on sidewalks, so that the police already enforce that based on pedestrian dentistry. I want to say dentistry, which makes no sense. Density.
I mean, the entire zoning code is basically based on density.
Right.
So are we protecting everybody or people on certain blocks, or what are we doing here?
I think
not-
the problem is with density. And, you know, if you have someone way out, for example, in my ward, out by the cemetery at the very, very far end of the east end, right next door to them is the cemetery. They don't need to be wearing a mask. If you're in Dave or Katie's or
Yeah.
any other super densely packed neighborhood, it makes more sense. It's not a matter
So
of
just
protecting more. Sorry, go ahead. Steve.
restate the state ordinance as a local ordinance, and then you could just
Then the police can
enforce
do,
it locally as well as under the state. So there'd be no change, except the
Yeah.
cops could now write tickets locally.
Can we
Mhm.
enforce it? Can we define that by certain streets? Or like what I was saying, Clinton to
It'd
Union?
be the entire city. It would just be an
Yeah.
ordinance that affects
The
the entire
entire
city,
yeah.
restating what the state executive order already is. Which is if you can't socially distance, you have to wear a mask.
I
That's
think
already in effect statewide is what he's
Yeah,
saying. It already
yeah.
covers the entire city of Oneonta
and it doesn't
Right, and then
mean
you could just
a
write a
man and
local
wife-
ordinance that,
that allows
you
the
could write a
police to
local
write a ticket
ordinance
for
that
it.
allows the police to write a ticket. So it would be a local
I think that's-
violation, as well as then you could also write a ticket based on the executive order.
So who first suggested this and why didn't you suggest it an hour ago?
It was suggested an hour ago.
Not taking the local law and just making it into or the state law and making it into a local ordinance, I don't think. But anyway, I'm fine with that. If Katie's okay with that, I'm okay with it. Because I think it's our neighborhoods that are impacted probably the most.
I think
You
it's
have a
better
number
than
to call?
nothing.
What's that, Katie?
Okay.
I think it's better than nothing.
David, could you possibly get this written for the next council meeting?
Yes, I can get it written for the next council meeting for consideration. It couldn't be passed. It would have to,
Oh, of course not.
it'd have to be laid on the desks.
Yep.
And public hearing, right?
Well, it has to be laid on the desk for 7 days before you can make a determination as to whether or not you're going to pass it or not. But yes, I can do that, and I'll model it. I'll essentially model it after the Cooperstown ordinance, which specifically states that it's following the New York State the executive order. Except that what I won't do is say that you've got to wear a mask all the time in a specific geographic area. I'll send it out. If you have comments, you can.
Sure.
Okay, I have a question now. Sorry, everyone, and hopefully it'll be quick. How subjective is 6 feet? I mean, are we expecting our police department to like measure in some way so that no one comes back and says, well, we were 6 feet apart?
The answer is the people can always say any distance, any sound, any speed. They can always contest that. The police officers will be able to testify based on their expertise, and then the judge can decide whether the cop is lying or whether the student is lying.
We have some photographic evidence as well with body cameras and dash cameras,
Yeah.
depending on the situation.
Dave, I think he meant person is lying, not student.
Yeah, what he just said. Yeah.
Okay, are we moving on then with We
Yep.
have,
The
we
good
have
news
another,
is we got basically nowhere with the state liquor authority, so we don't have a lot to discuss there.
okay. So we are 2 minutes from done and Len has to prepare.
Could I
Yes.
ask a quick question of Katie?
Sure.
Sure.
When you said that you got nowhere, what does that mean specifically? Did you contact them and heard nothing, or?
I can read
No.
the email if you give me 2 seconds, if that helps.
Yeah, they emailed us back and basically said that the county, I'm just gonna freestyle while Dave finds the email. They said that the county could restrict hours of sales of alcohol by county.
Right, yeah, I knew that.
We would have to
Okay.
ask the board for that. Okay.
He said, this is Sharif Kabir. We understand the issue and will, of course, help any way we can. However, the ABC law predominantly prescribes statewide regulation and only minimally allows for separate local rules. For example, county closing hours, local option for dry, partially dry municipalities, and the SLA's ability to limit the number of a class of licenses in a municipality. I'm guessing that when they changed the closing hours of bars, that's by county, not by city. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then
I'll tell you someday the story of why the phrase "rally at the tally" meant something. Thank you, Chief Brenner.
And the
He's turning red.
Well, Otsego County used to have an earlier closing than Delaware County, and the Tally Ho restaurant was just over the border in Delaware County. So as the bars would close in downtown Oneonta, they would then go over to Delaware County. And so everyone, when bars were closing, they'd say, "Well, rally at the Tally," and they would all drive over to Davenport Center or wherever it is. It's Pinder's Corners.
All right, I think we're closed. So,
Sounds good. I'll get a draft out to you in the next couple of days.
Great.